Karen Winters stood behind the International Airways counter, her badge gleaming under the bright airport lights. At 42, she'd worked her way up to customer service supervisor and took pride in running a tight ship at Terminal B. The Monday morning rush was in full swing, travelers hurrying to gates, announcements echoing overhead, the constant hum of rolling suitcases across the polished floor. When 19-year-old Nia Johnson approached Karen's counter, nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first. Nia placed her passport and ticket on the counter with a polite smile. She wore a simple black dress, her hair pulled back neatly, carrying just a small carry-on bag. "I'm flying to Kingston," Nia explained. "My grandmother passed away, and the funeral is tomorrow afternoon." Karen barely acknowledged the personal information as she flipped through Nia's passport. Her eyebrows raised slightly, then furrowed. "How long have you had this passport?" Karen asked, her voice taking on an edge that made the travelers in line behind Nia look up from their phones. "About 3 years," Nia replied, pulling out her driver's license as additional ID. "Is something wrong?" Karen ignored the question, holding the passport up to the light. "This doesn't look right to me. The photo doesn't even look like you." A few passengers exchanged glances. Nia stood straighter, confusion crossing her face. "That's definitely me. I can show you my student ID as well if—" "I've been doing this job for 15 years, Karen cut in, her voice rising. "I know what legitimate documentation looks like." A nearby coworker, a younger man who'd started just months ago, glanced over uncomfortably but said nothing. The line behind Nia grew longer, with several travelers now openly watching the interaction. One woman pulled out her phone and began recording discreetly. "I don't understand," Nia said, her voice steady despite Karen's growing hostility. "This is my passport. I've traveled internationally with it before. I really need to make this flight. My family is expecting me." Karen's lips thinned to a tight line. "You expect me to believe this is legitimate? Where did you even get this from?" An older couple behind Nia exchanged concerned glances. The husband checked his watch nervously while his wife leaned forward slightly, as if considering whether to intervene. "From the U.S. State Department, like everyone else," Nia replied, maintaining her composure though her hands trembled slightly. She reached for her phone. "I can pull up my passport application confirmation if that would help." "That won't be necessary," Karen snapped, suddenly grabbing the passport from the counter. "This is clearly fraudulent, and I cannot allow you to travel with false documentation." Before anyone could react, Karen did the unthinkable. With deliberate motions, she gripped the passport with both hands and tore it straight down the middle. The terminal seemed to freeze. Nia's mouth fell open in shock. The ripping sound had been so loud that several more travelers turned to stare. The woman recording raised her phone higher, no longer attempting to be subtle. "What have you done?" Nia whispered, her voice barely audible as she stared at her destroyed passport. "That's federal property, you can't just—" The silence that followed was broken by a sharp voice from behind Karen. "What's going on here?" The airport's operations manager had appeared, drawn by the commotion. His face darkened as he took in the torn passport on the counter and the stunned faces of everyone watching. The tension in the air could be cut with a knife as the growing crowd watched the scene unfold. Nia still couldn't believe what had just happened. Her passport, torn in half right before her eyes. She felt her throat tighten, but refused to break down in front of everyone. "She destroyed my passport," Nia explained to the operations manager, her voice remarkably steady despite the circumstances. "I showed her all my ID, but she wouldn't listen." The operations manager, a tall man with salt and pepper hair, looked from the torn passport to Karen's defiant face. Other airline employees began to gather nearby, whispering among themselves. "Everyone in line, please proceed to counter 4, announced a quick-thinking colleague, trying to manage the situation. But few people moved, too invested in what was happening. Karen crossed her arms. That document was obviously fake. I was doing my job protecting this airline and our country's borders. By destroying federal property, the manager asked quietly, his calm tone somehow more intimidating than if he'd shouted. An older woman stepped forward from the line. "I recorded the whole thing," she said, holding up her phone. "This young lady was nothing but polite, while your employee was hostile from the start." Karen's face flushed red. You don't understand the pressure we're under to spot fake documents. I've been trained to recognize. You've been trained to escalate concerns to security, the manager cut in, not to act as judge and jury. He turned to Nia with genuine concern. I'm deeply sorry about this. Let's move somewhere more private to sort this out. As they walked toward a side office, whispers rippled through the terminal. Several passengers pulled out phones, typing rapidly. The incident was already making its way online. In the small office, Nia finally let her composure slip slightly. My grandmother's funeral is tomorrow, she said, her voice cracking. I saved for months for this ticket. What am I supposed to do now? The operations manager handed her a tissue. We'll contact the State Department immediately. This should never have happened. Meanwhile, Karen paced outside, arguing with another supervisor. You don't understand. That passport had inconsistencies. The hologram didn't reflect right. That wasn't your call to make, the supervisor replied firmly. And now we have a PR nightmare brewing. Look around you. Karen glanced over to see at least a dozen people with phones pointed in their direction. One young man was doing a live stream, narrating what he just witnessed. Just tore up her passport. Can you believe that? The poor girl was just trying to get to her grandmother's funeral, and this lady. Back in the office, the airline's customer service director had arrived, having been called down from the executive suite. She sat across from Nia, her expression grave. I want to personally apologize for what happened today, she said. This is completely unacceptable and does not represent our company values or policies. Nia nodded, exhaustion now visible on her face. I just need to get to Kingston somehow. My family is waiting. Outside, the situation was escalating. Someone had recognized Karen from a previous incident at the same airport and was sharing the story loudly. Social media was already connecting dots, with hashtags forming and outrage building. Karen began to realize the severity of what she'd done as her phone buzzed with a message from her own daughter. Mom, are you okay? There's a video going viral of someone who looks like you at the airport. The operations manager stepped out of the office, his phone pressed to his ear. He was speaking with the State Department, explaining the urgent situation. When he spotted Karen still arguing with the supervisor, his expression hardened. Karen, he called, gesturing her over. We need to talk. Now. As she walked toward him, Karen felt the weight of dozens of stares following her. Something told her that tearing that passport would be the last official action she'd ever take as an employee of International Airways. Karen followed the operations manager into a small conference room, her steps hesitant but her chin still held high. The glass walls gave her a clear view of the chaos unfolding in the terminal, Nia speaking with customer service representatives, passengers pointing and whispering, phones recording every moment. Sit down, the operations manager said, closing the door behind them. His voice was controlled but cold. Karen took a seat but immediately launched into her defense. Look, I know it seems extreme, but we get training every year about document fraud. That passport had inconsistencies with the... Stop. The word hit like a hammer. Whether that passport had issues or not, and our security team says it absolutely did not, you had no authority to destroy it. But the protocol... The protocol, he said, leaning forward, is to contact a supervisor and security if you have concerns. Not to destroy federal government property, not to humiliate a customer in front of dozens of witnesses. Karen's phone buzzed again, another message. The video was spreading faster than either of them realized. A quick glance showed 3 missed calls from her husband. Outside the conference room, the airline's head of security arrived. He went straight to Nia, examining the torn pieces of her passport carefully. His expression told everyone what they already suspected: the document was perfectly legitimate. Meanwhile, the customer service director had commandeered a desk and was making urgent calls. Yes, we need emergency passport services. Yes, it's an extraordinary circumstance. The funeral is tomorrow in Kingston. Nia sat nearby, staring at her phone as messages poured in from family members waiting for her in Jamaica. How could she tell them she might miss her grandmother's funeral because someone tore up her passport? A younger employee approached her with a bottle of water. I'm so sorry this happened, she whispered. We're all shocked. Nothing like this has ever. Back in the conference room, The operations manager got a call. He listened, his expression growing darker by the second, then ended it without a word. That was the regional director, he told Karen. The video has over 50,000 views already. Our social media team is being flooded. Karen's face drained of color. But they don't understand the context. The context is clear in the video. He cut her off. Every second of it. Your questions. Her responses. You grabbing and destroying her passport. For the first time, doubt crept into Karen's expression. I was just trying to do my job. Your job was never to act as border patrol or federal agent, he replied. Your job was customer service. A knock on the door interrupted them. The head of HR had arrived, a folder already in hand. The look exchanged between her and the operations manager told Karen everything she needed to know. Outside, something unexpected was happening. Other passengers had begun to rally around Naya. An elderly couple offered to help with her expenses. A business traveler in a sharp suit was on the phone with his travel agency, trying to find her alternative routes to Kingston. My company has a private charter leaving for Montego Bay tonight, he told her. I can get you a seat if that helps. It's about 2 hours from Kingston by car, but... That would be amazing, Naya said, her eyes finally showing a glimmer of hope. The customer service director overheard and rushed over. Please let us handle Ms. Johnson's travel arrangements. International Airways will ensure she reaches her destination today, all expenses covered. As this was happening, another airline employee approached with an iPad. Ms. Johnson, the State Department is on video call for you. They've been briefed on the situation and want to discuss emergency passport options. In the conference room, Karen was now facing 3 senior managers, all with grim expressions. Effective immediately, your employment with International Airways is terminated, the HR director stated formally. Karen's mouth fell open. You can't be serious. For one mistake? After 15 years? This wasn't a mistake, the operations manager replied. This was a deliberate action against company policy, federal regulations, and basic human decency. As the HR director slid the termination papers across the table, Karen finally realized the magnitude of what she'd done. Through the glass, she could see Nia surrounded by support while she sat isolated. Her career ended in less time than it had taken to tear that passport. You'll need to surrender your badge and airport access card, the HR director continued. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings. Karen's hands trembled as she unpinned her badge. 15 years of service reduced to this moment, all because of a split-second decision she couldn't take back. While Karen was escorted through the employee exit, the airline had transformed an executive lounge into a command center for handling Nia's situation. The customer service director had personally taken charge, determined to fix what had become a public relations nightmare unfolding in real time. We've secured you a seat on our direct flight to Kingston leaving at 2 p.m., she told Nia, who was now sitting in a plush lounge chair, still looking shocked by everything that had happened. That gives the State Department 4 hours to process your emergency passport. Is that even possible? Nia asked, doubt clear in her voice. She'd heard stories about government bureaucracy. Getting a replacement passport typically took weeks, not hours. The head of security nodded. The State Department has a special office at this airport for exactly these kinds of emergencies. They're expediting everything. I just got confirmation they're printing your temporary passport now. For the first time since her passport was torn apart, Nia felt a sense of relief wash over her. Maybe she would make it to her grandmother's funeral after all. Outside the lounge, the situation was spreading like wildfire across the internet. The video had now been viewed over 200,000 times and was being picked up by news outlets. #JusticeFornia was trending, and International Airways' social media team was working overtime responding to the outrage. What are we going to tell the press? The airline's communications director asked, joining the group in the lounge. They're already calling. 3 news vans just pulled up outside the terminal. The regional director, who had flown in from headquarters on a private jet just 30 minutes ago, straightened his tie. We tell them the truth. We had an employee who violated our policies and federal law. That employee has been terminated. We're doing everything in our power to make this right for Ms. Johnson. Back at her home, Karen sat at her kitchen table, staring blankly at her phone as it continued to buzz with notifications. Her husband paced behind her, trying to process what had happened. 15 years, Karen whispered. 15 years of perfect performance reviews, never late. Never called in sick when they needed me. And now this? You destroyed someone's passport, Karen, her husband replied, his voice tight with stress. What did you think would happen? I thought I was doing my job, she snapped, then immediately deflated. The training videos always emphasized how we're the front line against fraud. They made it seem like we'd be heroes if we caught fake documents. But you didn't catch anything, he said gently. And even if you had suspicions, tearing it up wasn't the answer. Karen's phone buzzed again, this time with a text from her daughter at college. Mom, my roommate just showed me the video. That's you, isn't it? People here are talking about it. At the airport, things were moving with unprecedented speed. A State Department official arrived at the lounge, carrying a sealed envelope. Ms. Johnson, he said, approaching Nia. I'm from the U.S. Passport Agency. We've processed your emergency temporary passport. He handed her the envelope. This is valid for 1 year, though I recommend applying for a standard replacement when you return. Nia accepted the envelope with trembling hands. Thank you. I didn't think this was possible. When federal property is destroyed, especially in such circumstances, we take immediate action, he explained. Plus, your situation, traveling for a family funeral, qualified for humanitarian expediting. The customer service director checked her watch. We should head to the gate soon. Your flight begins boarding in 40 minutes. As they prepared to leave the lounge, the regional director approached Nia. Ms. Johnson, on behalf of International Airways, I want to extend our deepest apologies. What happened today was inexcusable. He'd handed her an envelope. Inside you'll find documentation of full reimbursement for your ticket, vouchers for future travel, and our commitment to cover any expenses related to this incident, including transportation in Jamaica. Nia nodded, still processing everything. Thank you. As they walked through the terminal toward the gate, people began to recognize her from the viral video. A few offered sympathetic smiles. One woman reached out and briefly touched her arm in solidarity. Meanwhile, airport security was dealing with another situation, news crews attempting to enter the terminal to cover the story. The airport's public information officer was giving an impromptu press conference near the entrance. The incident has been resolved internally by the airline, he explained to the gathering of reporters. The employee in question is no longer with the company, and the passenger is being fully accommodated. As Nia approached her gate with the airline officials, she couldn't help but marvel at how quickly her situation had changed, from victim of a shocking incident to the center of an international response effort in just under 2 hours. The regional director of International Airways paced in his office, his tie loosened and sleeves rolled up. The room had become a crisis management center with 3 PR specialists, the airline's legal counsel, and the head of customer experience all hunched over laptops and phones. The incident had exploded beyond anything they could have anticipated. The video just hit 1 million views, said a young woman monitoring social media. Major news networks are running it in their headline segments. They're calling it Passport Gate. The director rubbed his temples. What's the public sentiment analysis showing? It's not good, she replied, turning her screen to show a dashboard filled with angry red metrics. The hashtags are evolving too. It started with hashtag #JusticeFornia, but now there's hashtag Boycott International Airways gaining traction. The airline's legal counsel looked up from his phone. The Department of Transportation just issued a statement. They're launching an inquiry into our check-in procedures and employee training. Of course they are, the director muttered. He walked to the window overlooking the tarmac where planes continue their normal operations, oblivious to the PR inferno raging inside. How's our official statement coming along? A gray-haired PR specialist slid a tablet across the table. Draft 3. We've kept it direct and unequivocal about our responsibility. The statement read, International Airways acknowledges that one of our employees violated both company policy and federal law by destroying a passenger's passport. This behavior is completely unacceptable and does not represent our values. The employee has been terminated effective immediately. We are cooperating fully with federal authorities and have taken immediate steps to assist the affected passenger. We are conducting a comprehensive review of our training procedures to ensure this never happens again." The director nodded. "Release it on all channels immediately." "And what about the passenger?" "Naya. Where is she now?" "Her flight is over the Caribbean," the customer experience head answered. "We've arranged VIP handling in Kingston. A car will be waiting to take her directly to her family." Meanwhile, Karen sat in her living room with the blinds drawn. Her phone had been ringing nonstop until she finally turned it off. 2 local news vans were parked outside her house, reporters occasionally knocking on her door seeking comment. Her husband returned from peeking through the blinds. "They're still out there. This is insane." Karen stared blankly at the wall. "Did you see the comments online? They're calling me racist, saying I targeted her because she's black." Her voice cracked. "That's not what happened. I would have questioned anyone with documentation that seemed off to me." Her husband sighed heavily but didn't respond. The silence between them spoke volumes. "My sister called," he finally said. "She saw it on the news in Chicago. Your brother called too. Everyone's seen it, Karen." The reality was sinking in for Karen. This wasn't just about losing her job. Her face and name were now recognizable across the country, associated with an act that looked, to millions of viewers, like a clear case of discrimination. Back at International Airways headquarters, the company's CEO had joined the crisis team, having cut short a business trip in Europe. "We need to go beyond damage control," she announced to the room. "This is a moment for radical transparency and real change." She turned to the training director who had been called in. "I want a complete overhaul of our customer service protocols, new diversity training for every frontline employee. And I want it visible to the public, show them exactly what we're changing." The PR team exchanged glances. This was bolder than their standard crisis playbook. "Also," the CEO continued, "I want to personally speak with Nia when she returns from Jamaica. Not just to apologize again, but to invite her to be part of our solution. If she's willing, her perspective could be invaluable in reshaping our approach." As the team began mapping out this more proactive strategy, Nia's plane descended toward Kingston. She gazed out the window at the lush green island below, still processing the whirlwind of the past few hours. The flight attendant approached her seat. "Ms. Johnson, the captain asked me to let you know we've been cleared for priority landing. There will be an expedited customs process waiting for you." Nia nodded gratefully. After all the chaos, she would make it to her grandmother's funeral after all. She pulled out her phone to send a message to her mother. Only then did she notice the hundreds of notifications pouring in, messages from friends, strangers, news outlets all wanting to hear her story. What had started as a personal nightmare had somehow transformed into something much bigger than herself. As the plane's wheels touched down on Jamaican soil, Nia realized that when she returned home, her life would never be quite the same again. The evening news broadcasts across America led with the same story, the airport passport incident. Anchors introduced the viral video with grave expressions, analysts debated the implications, and social media feeds overflowed with heated discussions. What had begun as one woman's travel nightmare had evolved into a national conversation about power, prejudice, and accountability. In her once modest home on the outskirts of Kingston, Nia sat surrounded by relatives, her grandmother's funeral preparations temporarily paused as family members crowded around a laptop watching the coverage. "Look at all these comments supporting you," her cousin said, scrolling through a news site's comment section. "People are outraged on your behalf." Nia's phone buzzed constantly with interview requests from major networks. 3 different morning shows wanted her to appear via satellite the next day. A prominent civil rights attorney had left 2 voicemails offering representation. "I don't know what to do with all this attention," Nia admitted, setting her phone down. "I just wanted to get here for Grandma's funeral. I never expected to become some kind of symbol." Her mother squeezed her shoulder. "You don't have to decide anything tonight. Tomorrow we honor your grandmother. Everything else can wait." But even as her family tried to refocus on their loss, the outside world continued to react. The incident had struck a nerve, becoming a lightning rod for discussions about how people of color were treated in everyday situations. Back in the United States, International Airways headquarters remained illuminated well past midnight. The crisis management team had set up camp in the conference center with catered food and coffee stations, keeping everyone fueled through the emergency response. The board just finished their emergency call, the CEO announced, entering the room. They've unanimously approved our response plan, including the establishment of a new customer dignity task force with outside experts in diversity and customer service. The public response team reported that their statement had received mixed reactions. Most people appreciated the quick firing of Karen, but many questioned how someone with such apparent bias had been hired and trained in the first place. "We're getting flooded with stories from other travelers claiming similar treatment," noted the social media director. "Not as extreme as tearing passports, but patterns of excessive scrutiny and questioning of certain passengers." The CEO frowned. "We need to take these seriously. Set up a dedicated team to investigate every single one of these claims." Meanwhile, Karen had become the reluctant center of a different kind of attention. Several conservative commentators had begun defending her actions, framing her as a victim of cancel culture and woke mob mentality. A right-wing news host railed on his evening broadcast. "Here we have an employee trying to protect our borders from potential fraud, and she's crucified for it. 15 years of service thrown away because she was doing her job too thoroughly." Karen watched this coverage with a mixture of validation and discomfort. While part of her welcomed the support, another part recognized the damage she had caused. The footage of Nia's shocked face as her passport was torn haunted her thoughts. Her phone lit up with a text from a number she didn't recognize. "You're a hero to real Americans. Don't let them silence you. We want to help tell your side." It was from a producer at the same right-wing network. Karen stared at the message for a long moment before setting her phone down without responding. Something didn't feel right about becoming anyone's political pawn. Across social media, the conversation had expanded beyond this single incident. People shared their own experiences of being questioned, doubted, and scrutinized in airports, stores, and everyday situations because of their race. A popular travel blogger wrote a viral post about traveling while black that was shared hundreds of thousands of times within hours. What happened to Nia wasn't an isolated incident. It's just rare that these moments get captured so clearly on video. For many of us, this is the tension we feel every time we approach a counter, wondering if today is the day our documents will be suspicious. In Kingston, as midnight approached, Nia finally stepped away from the family gathering to get some air on her once porch. The tropical night was warm and fragrant with flowers. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a direct message from a major civil rights organization asking her to speak at their upcoming conference. She looked up at the stars, so bright in the Jamaican sky, and took a deep breath. Tomorrow she would bury her grandmother. But soon she would have to decide, would she return to the States and step into this unexpected spotlight, or try to return to the normal life of a college student? As crickets chirped around her, Nia realized that perhaps the decision had already been made the moment Karen tore her passport in two. Some moments change your path forever, whether you're ready for them or not. 3 months after the passport incident, Nia stood nervously backstage at a national travel industry conference. The audience of airline executives, security personnel, and travel industry leaders filled the large hotel ballroom, their quiet conversations creating a steady hum. "You ready for this?" asked her aunt, who had flown in from Jamaica to support her. Nia nodded, smoothing down the jacket of her new navy blue suit. "As ready as I'll ever be." The past 3 months had transformed her life in ways she never could have imagined. After returning from her grandmother's funeral, she had made a crucial decision to use her unexpected platform to push for real change rather than just accept compensation and move on. Her speech today marked the culmination of those efforts. The conference organizer approached with a smile. 5 minutes, Ms. Johnson. We have a full house waiting to hear from you." On the other side of the country, Karen sat in her kitchen, a job application half completed on her laptop. This was her 27th application since being fired. So far, she had received only rejections or silence. Her name and face had become too recognizable, too associated with controversy. The television in her living room was tuned to a news channel where a split screen showed the conference where Nia would be speaking. Karen paused her typing, drawn to the coverage despite herself. Her husband noticed her watching. "Are you sure you want to see this?" Karen nodded slowly. "I need to." Back at the conference, the introduction began. The industry association president spoke about learning from failures and transforming customer experiences before finally introducing Nia as a young woman whose experience has become a catalyst for industry-wide reflection and change. Applause filled the room as Nia took the stage. Under the bright lights, she took a deep breath and began. 3 months ago, I was just a college student trying to get to my grandmother's funeral. Today, I'm speaking to the leaders of an entire industry about how to treat people with dignity and respect, not because I wanted this role, but because circumstances thrust it upon me. The audience listened intently as she continued. What happened to me wasn't just about one employee making a terrible decision. It was about systems that failed at multiple levels. It was about training that emphasized suspicion over service. It was about what happens when we forget that behind every passport and ticket is a human being with their own story. Across the country, watching on her kitchen television, Karen felt tears welling in her eyes. Hearing Nia speak about the incident with such clarity and without personal attacks hit her harder than the angry social media posts ever had. At the conference, Nia moved from her personal experience to the concrete changes now being implemented at International Airways and other carriers. The new traveler dignity protocols being announced today aren't just about preventing another viral video moment. They're about recognizing that security and respect aren't opposing forces. They can and must coexist. She outlined the changes, new training programs developed with input from diverse community representatives, clear escalation procedures that protected both passenger rights and security concerns, and accountability measures that would track patterns of passenger complaints. The true measure of these changes won't be in press releases or policy documents, Nia concluded. It will be in the everyday experiences of travelers who never make headlines because they're treated with fairness and respect from the start. The standing ovation lasted nearly 2 minutes. Later that evening, as Nia was having dinner with her aunt and the conference organizers, her phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line made her pause. A long overdue apology. It was from Karen. "I've written and deleted this message 100 times over the past months," the email began. "No words seem adequate for the harm I caused you. I've spent these months reflecting on my actions and the implicit biases I never acknowledged in myself." The message continued, not asking for forgiveness or attempting to justify her actions, but simply acknowledging the hurt she had caused and the growth she was trying to undertake. Nia read it twice before setting her phone down, a complex mix of emotions washing over her. "Everything okay?" her aunt asked. "I think it might be," Nia replied quietly. "Not because everything is fixed, but because things are finally moving in the right direction." The next morning, news outlets reported on Nia's powerful speech and the industry changes it had helped inspire. What had begun as a shocking moment of injustice had transformed into something constructive, proof that accountability could lead to meaningful change. As Nia packed her suitcase in the hotel room, preparing to fly home, she smiled at the fresh new passport sitting on the nightstand. This time, her journey through the airport would be different. And because of her courage in speaking up, countless other journeys would be different too.